They said we wouldn't make it and wanted to shoot us down. Your shame on our backs like blankets, covering our bodies on the ground. We will rise, we'll rise again. Our spirits know no bounds. You put our hands in chains. We'll rise, we will rise again.
For thousands of years, cannabis has been consumed by humans to remedy ailments, relieve stress, expand consciousness, and explore altered states of being. From ancient shamanic and mystic rituals to modern entheogenic explorations, cannabis has been used as a tool for spiritual awakenings. But in the early 20th century, a puritanical movement ignited prohibitions. It was believed that only a global repressive regime could save humanity from the evils of some new and little-known substances, including cannabis. And with the 1961 United Nations Single Convention, world leaders sought to get rid of illegal drugs. They imagined that a drug-free world would be achieved within the next 25 years. And since that time, this vision has dominated policy, unleashing devastation worldwide. From the beginning, criminologists, legal sociologists, and jurists warned against the misuse of the justice system. These prescient voices predicted that prohibition would not eliminate drugs, but instead empower organized crime and tyrannical regimes. And history has vindicated them. While prohibition failed to suppress the supply or demand for illicit substances, it demonized dealers and stigmatized users. In the name of protecting society from the scourge of drugs, budgets soared, and police powers expanded exponentially. Yet, rather than achieving a drug-free paradise, the result has been profound suffering for communities globally, eroding public trust in authorities. This is the heart of the crisis. Governments have pursued cannabis users and suppliers with unyielding fervor, but a mountain of reports exposes a remedy far deadlier than the ailment itself. With alcohol and tobacco effectively regulated, the hypocrisy is stark, and society is awakening to how distorting the laws of supply and demand into a tale of victims and oppressors undermines the rule of law. This realization has prompted constitutional courts in Mexico, South Africa, and Brazil to affirm autonomy rights for cannabis use. As more nations regulate cannabis to protect public health, no government can credibly claim that prohibition serves a legitimate purpose. Instead, the rule of law demands accountability. Yet, Europe's human rights guardians have faltered in addressing cannabis rights, leaving 700 million people exposed to arbitrary persecution. The tale of how Europe's human rights protection system faltered begins in Norway, a stronghold of strict prohibition that exemplifies the backwardness of outdated policies amid global advancement. Under Penal Code sections 231 to 232, Norway upholds its vision of a narcotics-free society, supported by one of Europe's most robust police forces per capita. In a country of just 5.4 million, this machinery has imposed over 1 million punitive sanctions in 6 decades, at an annual cost exceeding 6.5 billion Norwegian kroner. It perpetuates organized crime, fuels up to 50% of property crimes, and claims around 300 lives yearly from overdoses, with no demonstrable deterrent effect. Since 2002, numerous Norwegian reports have laid bare these policy failures, revealing the gulf between legal ideals and grim reality. Yet politicians have stubbornly resisted less intrusive alternatives. The 2019 Drug Reform Committee report identified moral panic as the driving force, but no amount of evidence has deterred Norwegian leaders from their quixotic quest to eradicate drugs. Contrast this with pioneering nations. Germany's 2024 reforms legalized possession for adults and established cannabis social clubs, aiming to dismantle black markets and ease judicial strain. Canada's 2018 legalization reduced youth arrests by approximately 60%, while usage rates among young people showed initial fluctuations but eventual stabilization. Uruguay's model has curtailed drug-related crimes, and progressive countries like Luxembourg, Portugal, the Netherlands, Malta, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic are abandoning criminalization. These nations prioritize public health over hysteria, proving that regulation works. Yet Norway, ignoring its own analyses, clings to a fear-mongered regime, mirroring historical witch hunts and exacerbating Europe's rule of law crisis. For over 60 years, politicians have peddled drug policies built on false premises, and the pivot toward regulated markets began more than 40 years ago in the Netherlands, the only European nation where leaders genuinely listened to experts. In the 1970s, the Dutch Baan and Hulsman committees rejected criminalization, arguing that cannabis should not be lumped with harder drugs. This led to the coffee shop system, which by 1994 had vastly outperformed rigid enforcement models. Inspired by this, Norwegian jurist Jos Andernes challenged prohibition that year, but the Justice Ministry and police dismissed alternatives. Public hysteria had a strong grip on the nation, enabling extremists in power to target vulnerable groups without regard for the rule of law. And this prompted cannabis users to seek judicial protection. Section 89 of the Norwegian Constitution tasks courts with overseeing the legislature and following the political inaction on the report of the Norwegian Criminal Law Commission. A pursuit of justice ensued. Backed by criminology and legal scholars, Norwegian cannabis activist Roar Michalsen contested the drug laws to safeguard rights, but prosecutors and the justice system insulated prohibition from examination. In 2010, the European Court of Human Rights was petitioned for relief, but in 2012, the court dismissed the application without explanation, breaching Article 6, the right to a fair trial, and 13, the right to an effective remedy. By its own benchmarks, this ruling failed to uphold the rule of law, abandoning persecuted groups without convention safeguards. For Europeans, the cost was prolonged subjection to arbitrary laws, and as the 2019 drug reform faltered despite another report leveraging regulation by exposing prohibition's profound failures, civil disobedience persisted. In 2021, the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies organized cannabis protests at Oslo's main police station, offering prosecutors a chance to restore judicial integrity. The Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies secured 3 days in court to present evidence of arbitrary persecution and leadership shortcomings, but after prosecutorial objections, the Norwegian justice system orchestrated another cover-up. No evidence of human rights violations was permitted, mocking constitutional protections, and when the European Court of Human Rights rejected another complaint without addressing its merits, defiance intensified. By this point, the justice system had revealed itself as a sham. Judicial independence was compromised by judges shielding cannabis prohibition from scrutiny at any cost, and as authoritarianism rose, the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies launched a 2022 protest at the Storting. Despite delivering large quantities of cannabis to authorities and urging judicial activation, police refrained from intervening. This was extraordinary, and to compel action, the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies staged its next protest at the Director of Public Prosecution's office. On April 20, 2023, 100 grams of cannabis were offered to authorities, but it ended up being distributed publicly on Oslo's main street after police and prosecutors refused to seize the evidence of drug law infractions. This unprecedented act clearly shook the system to its core, signaling that the prosecution recognized the human rights dilemma. Even so, the police continued hunting for scapegoats. Officially, they were dedicated to stopping all drug law violations and to expose arbitrary persecution. The Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies celebrated the September 7, 2023 premiere of Mikkelsen versus Norway, with another protest at the director's office. This documentary laid bare systemic failures to protect rights, and politicians, prosecutors, and legal professionals were invited to confront fundamental challenges to the justice system, yet none attended. The prohibitionist psychosis ensured that principled guidance remained taboo, and once more, the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies held firm without challenge. By this time, a pattern of avoidance had emerged where the police and prosecution evaded the human rights argument while disregarding evidence of violations. The impulse to ignore these breaches outweighed the duty to uphold judicial integrity, and Norwegian police persisted in targeting cannabis users elsewhere, fueling further resistance. In October 2023, therefore, the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies mailed 100 grams of cannabis to drug policy officials, prosecutors, and professionals. Another 100 grams followed in January 2024 to challenge the criminalization of an unjustly prohibited substance, and when charges were withheld, the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies finally opened a cannabis cafe in Oslo, vending the plant to force oversight. This bold move was impossible for the police to ignore, paving the way for another confrontation in Norway's justice system. To illuminate systemic flaws, the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies prepared a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, seeking 15 days in court to demonstrate arbitrary persecution and leadership lapses. The Norwegian police did not want this. Instead, the prosecution continued its disregard for constitutional protections, shielding its leadership from criticism, and the justice system followed suit, barring witnesses or evidence that exposed failures. Thus, the European Court of Human Rights has been afforded yet another opportunity to instill integrity in the justice system. This is the fourth occasion that Norwegian activists approach the court, and time will reveal whether the European Court of Human Rights possesses the resolve to confront one of the era's paramount human rights issues and expose a discriminatory justice system. The stakes are high. Annually, tens of thousands of Norwegians face penalties for behavior less harmful than regulated activities, with several 100,000 cases contested since 2010, when the Supreme Court first sidelined constitutional protections. In another 45 countries, millions of cannabis users have been punished without regard for the rule of law, as the European Court of Human Rights has shielded prohibition from review, dismissing challenges as manifestly ill-founded without rationale. This contravenes the court's own standards, eroding rights jurisprudence. It is a dereliction of duty stemming from a prohibitionist psychosis that not only scapegoats cannabis users, but dismantles constitutional bulwarks. True judicial independence necessitates interrogating prohibition, yet for 15 years, 700 million Europeans have been denied human rights protections due to court deficiencies. Given the prestige, budgets, and authority tied to drug prohibition, immense pressure exists for courts to rebuff challenges. Nevertheless, European nations are progressively abandoning prohibition, and the court's inaction burdens the Council of Europe, the body tasked with safeguarding the human rights system. If treason lurks within the court, the Council of Europe must defend the rule of law against hypocritical double standards, and under Article 52, its obligation is clear: provide an effective remedy or relinquish legitimacy. This is why the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies' civil disobedience has expanded internationally. In 2025, Requiem for the Rule of Law, exhibitions and protests unfolded in Oslo, Berlin, and Strasbourg, unveiling European Court of Human Rights' systemic defects and demanding accountability. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission is poised to mend the wreckage from 60 years of misguided policies on the rule of law. But the institutions mandated to protect human rights are more vested in defending prohibition from scrutiny. This has left 46 nations without principled guidance, allowing a beast of biblical proportions to thrive on moral panic and corruption. That is the hard truth. Historically, rulers have pursued agendas far removed from reforming society according to the wisdom of first principles. And decades of unacknowledged failure, fueled by the power, budgets, and prestige of prohibition, have eroded these institutions from within, creating an Orwellian nightmare. Nothing is more detrimental to human rights than the play of politics, which is evident in these institutions. And it surely is the responsibility of those in positions of power to review the costs of prohibition. Until this is done, the protection of emperors without clothes will continue to undermine human rights progress. And unless the Council of Europe and European Court of Human Rights swiftly enact reforms to revive legal integrity, further demonstrations will ensue in Strasbourg. It appears that there is no other hope for Norwegian cannabis users. Even chronically ill patients are denied access to their preferred medicine by a system that does not recognize its benefits. And as Norway's justice system has spurned the rule of law, French authorities have an opening to preserve the Convention's honor. From the Enlightenment ideals of the French Revolution, we've seen a progressive march, abolishing slavery, advancing civil rights, and now challenging prohibition as a vestige of outdated control. The principles of liberty, equality, and brotherhood have sown seeds of collective awakening, and the French police is given a unique opportunity to assist Europe in rebuilding its rule of law. The only true revolution that humanity will ever have is a revolution of thought. This positions the French police not just as enforcers, but as guardians of the Western world's constitutional legacy, dismantling prohibition to birth an egregore of unity and higher consciousness. And to fight for the rule of law in 46 nations, the Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policies will bring cannabis at annual protests at the European Court of Human Rights until evidence of human rights violations is admitted. Time will tell if it will be the Council of Europe or the French police that have the courage to build integrity in a system corrupted by the power of enemy images. Since Machiavelli, rulers have been advised to wield such images for power and control, and Nixon's advisors Haldeman and Ehrlichman admitted that this was the motivation for starting a war on drugs. That is another hard truth. And cannabis prohibition had nothing to do with protecting public health. Instead, it was a tool for social control, invented to serve the needs and wants of those in power, and it has been remarkably successful. Across the world, hundreds of millions of non-violent offenders have been incarcerated to satisfy the profiteers of war. Tens of trillions of dollars have been laundered by Western banks, and even more has been spent on law enforcement. While the lower classes have been held in place, politicians, lawyers, and doctors have amassed incredible powers by disenfranchising free will, and the demonization of the drug dealer has encouraged humanity's most vile tendencies. That has been the purpose all along. Historians, criminologists, and sociologists of law have described scapegoating as the engine of drug policy. But the hunt for scapegoats continues because it serves a hidden purpose. As long as the enemy image of drugs burns brightly in our minds, logic is twisted to the point where our humanity is lost. And to Machiavellian power players, this is the dark magic that moves the world forward. They know that while liberty is the natural state, humans will accept tyranny for their own protection. As the history of drug policy shows, we will even kill and persecute others in the name of all things good. And while prohibition's absurdities have spawned atrocities, the world can be healed through truth and reconciliation. This is the real purpose of law: to guide humanity out of the shadows and into the light of utopian societies by leveraging first principles. The founders truly put us on a quest for the stars, and all it takes to bring about utopian societies is the end of atrocious double standards. This is the task of the European Court of Human Rights and the Council of Europe. If justice grinds slow, it is due to leadership failures, and Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and other friends of liberty have long noted the toll of over-incarceration. If the integrity of the human being has any value, a global prison population exceeding 11 million, with a significant portion comprising non-violent drug law offenders, is not an acceptable state of affairs. Instead, this untenable position reflects a reality of perverted and twisted values, where the discipline of law, meant to uphold higher law principles of natural rights, universal justice, and human dignity, has been hijacked to pervert the promise of our constitutions. From the perspective of higher law, which transcends man-made statutes and demands equity, autonomy, and compassion, prohibition twists constitutional guarantees of liberty and equality into instruments of oppression, entrenching division and suffering rather than fostering enlightenment. Only by reclaiming law's true essence, rooted in eternal truths that prioritize human flourishing over control, can we dismantle this corruption and fulfill the visionary ideals of freedom that our foundational documents were intended to secure. To elevate this further, consider prohibition as a dark egregore, a collective thought form born from shared fears and manipulations, taking on a psychic life of its own to sustain division and control. That is the monster that prohibition has become. Public officials, judges, doctors, and other professionals, in fact every member of society, can feel it. It accounts for the taboos and blind spots of drug policy, and it explains why the distance between theory and practice in human rights protection is not addressed. Yet, in mystic traditions, egregores can also herald a promise of higher consciousness, evolving humanity toward a threshold where we transcend egoic separation and recognize ourselves as cells in a larger organism, the cosmos awakening to itself through us. In our day, lawyers and mystics are usually worlds apart. That is why the former have such a bad reputation. But this evolutionary march is evident, century by century, in the realization of human rights law and constitutional principles. What we see as law works itself pure, free from contemporary restraints, is the shackles of humanity being broken. From the French Revolution's cry of liberté, égalité, fraternité, as a spark of collective enlightenment, to today's battles against systemic failures, the spirit of freedom is working in humanity, honing it for a higher purpose, and by dissolving prohibition's shadow egregore through truth and reconciliation, the French police, stewards of that revolutionary legacy, can become midwives to higher awakening, guiding us to realms of unity, expanded awareness, and boundless potential, where humanity fully embodies its cosmic destiny. That would be a job worthy of a policeman. It should also be the calling of every judge and politician, for in the end, those who sustain the absurdities of prohibition risk committing the greatest atrocity of all, denying our shared evolution toward a world free from fear.
We'll rise again. Our spirits know no bounds. Oh, you put our hands in chains. We will rise again. Oh, the stains on your hands won't go away. All your evil deeds still stays the same. You got only yourselves to blame. Now that history has taken all your names, because history is taking